Chapter 1. The Letter. The rain, a persistent melancholic drizzle that had characterized much of the autumn in Hampshire, sheeted against the tall rectory windows, blurring the already muted landscape of sodden fields and the skeletal outlines of trees surrendering their last leaves. Inside the parlor, the air hung thick with a familiar, layered sense of their constrained life. Damp wool from Papa's perpetually drying tweed coat hanging in the hall, the acrid tang of coal smoke puffing intermittently from the hearth where the fire struggled against the pervading chill, and the faint, inescapable aroma of aging paper and decaying leather bindings that emanated from the Reverend Vance's overflowing bookshelves, a constant reminder of an intellectual richness starkly at odds with their material poverty. The worn chintz sofa sagged slightly, its floral pattern faded like old hopes. The turkey carpet before the hearth displayed threads worn thin by generations of clerical footsteps. Eleanor Vance, perched on the window seat not for the dreary view, but for the weak gray light it offered, bent over her sketchbook, a furrow of concentration creasing her brow. At 20, she possessed a sharp intelligence and an observant nature that made the confines of her prescribed world feel increasingly suffocating. The charcoal stick felt rough and inadequate in her fingers today, as she attempted yet again to capture the noble, sleepy resignation of Barnaby, their elderly spaniel, who snored with gentle wheezes by the fire's meager warmth. The likeness remained stubbornly elusive, much like the future she yearned for. A quiet sigh escaped her lips, lost in the rhythmic tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that seemed to measure out the slow, predictable, and often frustratingly empty hours of her days. Daughter of a country clergyman, her social position was defined by respectability rather than resource. They occupied a specific rung on the complex Victorian ladder, undeniably middle class, yet closer to the drafty floorboards than the gilded ceiling. Papa's living was small, his stipend barely sufficient to maintain the facade of gentility expected of his station. The rectory roof, Eleanor knew with a familiar pang of anxiety, needed urgent repairs they couldn't afford. Her own wardrobe consisted mostly of carefully mended and refashioned dresses, and the quarterly bills for her younger brother Tom's modest public schooling were a source of constant, unspoken worry, discussed only in low, anxious tones between her father and herself when managing the household accounts. Her education, insisted upon by her father who believed a well-furnished mind was a woman's best dowry, felt both a blessing and a burden. A governess, then Papa himself, had ensured she read widely, Shakespeare, Wordsworth, Milton, even translations of Dante. She had a good grasp of French, could puzzle her way through basic Latin texts from the parish records, possessed a decent hand at sketching, and had devoured every copy of the Illustrated London News or Punch that found its way into the rectory, hungry for glimpses of the wider world. But this knowledge, this internal landscape filled with poetry, history, and far-off places, felt increasingly at odds with the narrow circumference of her actual life. Darning Papa's socks, ensuring Bessie the housemaid didn't waste precious soap, turning collars on worn shirts, arranging flowers for the Sunday service, enduring interminable parish teas where the conversation rarely strayed beyond weather and ailments. It equipped her for observation, yes, sharpened her ability to notice the subtle interplay of village hierarchies, the unspoken anxieties behind polite facades, but observation without participation felt like a form of starvation. She yearned for experience, for purpose, for a life less muted. Marriage, the expected path, seemed unlikely. Suitable young men rarely frequented impoverished rural rectories, and her lack of dowry was an insurmountable obstacle in most circles. The prospect of fading into genteel spinsterhood, forever managing her father's household, loomed large and gray. The familiar, slightly uneven tread of Mr. Dibble, the postman, sounded on the flagstones in the hall, followed by the clatter of letters falling through the slot onto the worn core mat. It was, as often, the most anticipated moment of the day, a brief potential connection to the world beyond Little Hallow. Usually it brought little, circulars, perhaps a letter from Tom, filled with requests for funds disguised as news, invitations to unavoidable diocesan events. Bessie, their hard-working maid of all work, bustled past the parlor door, her footsteps quickening with the ingrained habit of promptness. Eleanor paused, her charcoal hovering over Barnaby's sketched ear. A ridiculous, unfounded flutter of anticipation stirred within her. Why, she couldn't fathom. Perhaps it was simply the oppressive weight of the rain, the general sense of stagnation, that made her crave any novelty, however small. Bessie returned, holding a small damp stack. "Just these today, Miss Eleanor," she announced, separating them. "One for the Reverend. Looks like the churchwarden's hand. Another bill, I reckon." She sighed sympathetically, aware, as all servants were, of the household's financial pulse. "Oh, and this one. It's for you, miss." She held out a single envelope, startlingly different from the others. It was large, square, made of thick, expensive cream-colored paper that resisted the damp. It felt heavy, substantial in Eleanor's hand. The address, Miss Eleanor Vance, The Rectory, Little Hallow, Hampshire, was written in a bold, elegant, unfamiliar script, black ink standing sharp against the rich paper. There was no sender's address, only on the reverse an imposing crest embossed in dark blue wax, depicting a crown surrounded by intricate scrollwork incorporating what looked like lions and unicorns. It spoke unequivocally of officialdom, of authority, of a world utterly removed from parish concerns. "Thank you, Bessie," Eleanor managed, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. Her fingers trembled as she took the letter. Bessie lingered, her round face alight with undisguised curiosity. "Looks very important, miss. From London, maybe?" "Perhaps," Eleanor murmured, needing privacy to process this unexpected arrival. "Thank you, that will be all." Bessie, recalling her duties, curtsied quickly and retreated towards the kitchen, undoubtedly eager to speculate wildly with cook. Eleanor moved towards the window, turning the heavy envelope over and over. Who could possibly be writing to her like this? Her heart began a heavy, anxious thudding against her ribs. She squinted at the crest again. It wasn't local gentry, it felt governmental. Royal? The thought seemed preposterous. Taking a deep, unsteadying breath, she carefully broke the seal. The wax crumbled, releasing a faint, clean scent unlike the usual sealing wax her father used. Inside, a single sheet of matching heavy paper, folded with crisp precision. The same formal black script filled the page. She forced her eyes to focus, reading the words that seemed to leap out at her, simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. Office of the Master of the Household, Buckingham Palace, London. The 15th of October 1885. Dear Miss Vance, it is my duty to inform you that following inquiries made on your behalf by Mrs. Arbuthnot of Salisbury, a position has become available within Her Majesty's royal household which may suit your qualifications. The position is that of third assistant wardrobe maid, under the direction of the head dresser. The duties, while requiring diligence and discretion, are commensurate with the station. Accommodation and board will be provided, along with a yearly stipend of £10, paid quarterly. Should you wish to be considered for this appointment, you are requested to present yourself for an interview with the head dresser, Mrs. Thorne, at Buckingham Palace on Wednesday, the 28th day of October, at 11 o'clock in the forenoon. Further details regarding terms of employment will be discussed should the interview prove satisfactory. Please ensure you bring this letter and appropriate written references confirming your character, skills, and suitability for service within the royal household. Yours faithfully, Sir Henry Ponsonby, by direction, Private Secretary to Her Majesty the Queen, on behalf of the Master of the Household. Eleanor read it through once, then twice, then a third time, the formal words blurring slightly, her mind struggling to grasp the full import. Buckingham Palace. Her Majesty's royal household. Stipend £10. The head dresser. Sir Henry Ponsonby, and Mrs. Arbuthnot. Of course. A formidable widow, a distant connection of her late mother's, renowned for her vast network and her somewhat intimidating philanthropy, which often involved placing young women from good but impoverished families into suitable positions. Papa must have swallowed his pride and written to her, outlining their difficulties, appealing for help in finding Eleanor respectable employment. He hadn't mentioned it, likely wanting to spare her the potential disappointment if nothing came of it. A dizzying wave of conflicting emotions washed over Eleanor, leaving her feeling faint. Terror, sharp and immediate, at the thought of entering such an imposing, unknown world. Disbelief that such an offer could possibly be directed at her, Eleanor Vance of Little Hallow. And beneath it all, a wild, exhilarating surge of hope, almost painful in its intensity. London. The Palace. Service, yes, and humble service at that. Third assistant wardrobe maid sounded leagues below even a governess, but service at the very heart of the empire. Independence. A wage, however small. A chance to escape the suffocating quietude of the rectory, the pitying glances of neighbors, the slow dwindling of prospects. A chance to live, to experience the world she had only read about. But the fear returned, chilling the initial excitement. London, vast, dirty, dangerous, filled with temptations her father constantly warned against. The royal household, reputedly a place of rigid hierarchy, back-breaking work, stifling rules, and simmering intrigue, ruled over by a queen still shrouded in the deep mourning adopted after Prince Albert's death nearly a quarter-century ago, a monarch known for her strictness and formidable will. Could she possibly survive there? A clergyman's daughter with soft hands, a mind filled with poetry, and no experience whatsoever of grand houses or the protocols of service. Would they not see her education as a liability, her quiet nature as weakness? Would she be crushed by the demanding routine, the potential cruelty of superiors or colleagues? Her father chose that moment to enter the parlor, drawn perhaps by the unusual silence, his sermon notes in hand. He stopped short upon seeing her face, pale and wide-eyed, the imposing letter clutched in her hand. "Eleanor. My dear girl, what is it? You look as though you've seen a ghost." Wordlessly, she held out the letter. Reverend Vance took it, his brow furrowing as he noted the crest, the return address. He adjusted his spectacles, his expression shifting from curiosity to astonishment as he read. Like Eleanor, he read it through twice carefully, absorbing every word, before lowering it slowly, his gaze distant. Buckingham Palace, he murmured, the name sounding utterly incongruous amidst the familiar, faded furnishings of the rectory parlor. He looked directly at Eleanor, his eyes filled with a complex mixture of emotions she couldn't quite decipher. Pride? Fear? Regret? So, Mrs. Arbuthnot has exerted her influence. I wrote to her some weeks ago, outlining our position, exploring possibilities for suitable employment for you. Though I confess, my dear, I never anticipated this. Papa. Eleanor found her voice, though it trembled. What does it mean? It means, he said, walking slowly towards the fireplace, turning the thick paper over in his hands as if weighing its significance, that you have been presented with an opportunity, Eleanor. An extraordinary, daunting, potentially life-altering opportunity. He paused, staring into the small fire as if seeking guidance there. Service within the Queen's own household. It is considered highly respectable. Secure employment. Though the position. He hesitated. Third assistant wardrobe maid. It will involve long hours, tedious tasks, subordination to those above you. It is not, perhaps not what I might have hoped for you, intellectually. But it is a position, Papa, Eleanor insisted, the practical implications cutting through her fear. A stipend. £10 a year. Think what that could mean. It could pay Tom's fees for nearly half the year. It could help with the roof repairs. It would mean I would not be a burden. The last came out in a whisper, revealing the unspoken anxiety that shadowed her existence. You have never been a burden, Eleanor, her father said gently, though his eyes acknowledged the truth of her words. But yes, the practical advantages are undeniable. £10 plus board and lodging. It is a significant consideration in our current circumstances. He turned fully towards her then, the conflict clear on his face. But London, my dear. And the palace itself. It is a world so far removed from all you have known. The sheer scale of it, the temptations, the pressures. Are you prepared for such a life? For the demands of service in such a place? His concern was palpable, paternal love warring with financial necessity. I am 20, Papa, she replied, meeting his worried gaze directly, finding a surprising firmness welling up inside her. Old enough to make my own way. Old enough to face challenges. And perhaps my education has equipped me better than you think. Not for the mending itself, perhaps, she acknowledged with a flicker of her old frustration, but for observing, for learning quickly, for understanding different ways of life. And for discretion, she added, remembering the letter's emphasis. Reverend Vance looked at his daughter, seeing not just the quiet girl who arranged church flowers, but the intelligent young woman with the restless mind, trapped by circumstance. He saw her determination, her sense of duty, but also her inherent sensitivity, her vulnerability. Service requires more than discretion and intelligence, Eleanor, he said quietly. It requires resilience. Obedience. The ability to hold one's tongue, to endure unfairness sometimes, to accept one's place within a rigid structure. Can you do that? Eleanor thought of the alternative, remaining here, watching the family finances dwindle further, her own prospects fading with each passing year. The palace seemed terrifying, alien, yet it also represented escape, opportunity, a chance, however small, to shape her own destiny, contribute to her family, and experience the wider world. The fear was real, but the prospect of stagnation felt in that moment even more frightening. I can try, Papa, she said, her voice clear now, the decision solidifying even as she spoke it. I believe I must try. For Tom. For you. For myself. He studied her face for a long moment, then gave a slow, heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of generations of quiet endurance. Very well, Eleanor. If you are truly resolved, then you must go for the interview. He looked again at the letter, focusing now on the practicalities. Wednesday, the 28th. Less than a fortnight. You will need references. I shall write one immediately, and perhaps ask the Archdeacon for another. And suitable attire, we must see what can be managed. He placed the letter carefully on the mantelpiece, a tangible symbol of the unexpected, daunting future that had just arrived with the afternoon post. The rain beat against the window panes, but inside the quiet rectory, a significant decision had been made, setting Eleanor Vance on a path towards the very heart of the Queen's formidable shadow.